Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, constant reader Scott Daly, and joining me, as always, he is the prince who was promised, but like evil. It's Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Matt?
I'm the one from Game of Thrones, not the one from this story, so, watch out.
We are back, folks. We are back. We took a week off. We had a crazy week, and I think if you can hear the sound of Matt's voice right there, you will understand part of the craziness of the past week. Matt, you're hanging on by a thread here.
I'm hanging on. I'm just like I'm one of the characters in the story who was cursed to like not totally lose my voice, but like mostly lose my voice.
Sure, yeah.
And the worst part about it is that nobody really takes this seriously. Like they're like, that guy, he is blind and she lost her ears and you just kind of have like, you're like this now. And that's just,
you're a little scratchy throated. Yeah.
It's not impressive. Yeah.
Well, hopefully you're not the guy who a giant punches through the face. That's, I think, a worse outcome, probably.
I felt like that earlier this week, but no, that is not, that's not who I am.
So yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for the patience and understanding as we had to delay last week's episode. I'm going to be honest with you, folks. As you can hear, Matt, he's still not doing well. This episode might end up being shorter than planned as well. We're just going to kind of power through and see how it goes. But sometimes these things happen. I think we pride ourselves on the fact that in the 5 years we've been doing the show, this has not happened too often, but it does happen.
Yeah, duty calls.
Indeed, duty and laryngitis.
Yep.
Bronchitis
and
COVID.
All the itises. I don't know. There it goes. Yeah.
All right. This week on the show, Fairy Tale continues as we discuss chapters 24 through 28 of the novel. The Fair One begins, and after surviving the first round, Charlie and his 14 fellow prisoners engage in a daring escape. After reuniting with the remaining galleons, Charlie begins Operation Save the World and heads with Leia back into the Dead City for the last time. Oh my gosh, Matt, what did you think of this week's reading? A lot happened. A lot happened in these chapters.
Yeah. I had many feelings about this week. I'm still really enjoying this book. I like, the way everything played out. It felt like it was nicely set up, but not in a way where I could anticipate it. And so it was fun and satisfying as it went along. I think we had a nice mix actually of like sort of being sort of vaguely right about certain things and then like wrong about other things, and maybe just like actually fully right about a few things.
Yeah.
We'll try to pick out some of those as we go.
I think so. I mean, it definitely, there were like, I think we tried to get too deep with some of the things we thought this book was doing. And I think this book is doing those things, but just not in kind of as deep of a level as we perhaps thought. I think the thing about this week's reading is, we've got one more week after this, and then we finish the book. And so we really kind of got, in my estimation, kind of some of the main theming revealed to us in these couple of chapters. Some long-standing questions we had since the beginning of this book are kind of answered, or at least like a King shines enough of a light on them to like see the shape of what an answer could possibly be, which is exciting for us. And yeah, we realized that some of this is right and some of this is wrong. And I don't know. I've enjoyed this experience a lot.
Me too.
All right. Do you want to get into it? Let's do it. Chapter 24, first round, the last set. My Prince, what do you think? Our chapter begins with Jaya sitting down with Hamey, the person that she's paired with in this first round of the contest. The person, of course, that she will be most likely required to kill. She's telling him how much she doesn't want this, but then, the first round of the tournament begins and things go basically exactly as we figured they were going to go, Matt. People die. Lots of people die.
Lots of people, but not everybody. Yeah, I think this was within the parameters of what we predicted. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go ahead and say that I predicted specifically that they would go through this first round and then escape. So I'm nailing this right now.
Nailed it. Yeah, 100%.
So I know we talked last week, how 2 weeks ago now. See, you can tell how long ago I made the script because it says last week still here, and I just read that like Ron Burgundy. You talked a couple weeks ago about how none of these people really stuck out to you. That there were a lot of characters that were characterized very, very quickly of this prisoner group, and they all kind of felt samey, except that they were kind of defined broadly by one specific character trait. And I think I mostly agreed with that. But I still like got to the point here where when like Jaya had to kill Hamey, that really made me sad. I was really sad to lose that guy.
Yeah, I think Hamey was probably the most vividly drawn of the characters, aside from maybe Iota. He was one of the few that I cared about. He was also really kind and kind of took care of Charlie in a way that Iota never did. So
yeah,
I agree. I felt for this moment.
It is kind of an interesting choice that like this becomes in a lot of ways Charlie's quartet, Charlie's retinue as a prince. And the ones that we spent the most time characterizing are the ones, with the exception of Iota, are the ones that all die, right? Like we have Amit as well, right? Who doesn't make it. Is that his name? Gosh, I don't even remember characters' names anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think the audiobook reader just says Amit actually, but yeah.
Yeah, Amit. So he doesn't make it. Hamey doesn't make it, and these are some of the characters that were most specifically drawn. So now we're kind of left with that. I think the kind of final four we realize they're going to be are Iota, and then these two women, Jaya being one of them, right? But the two women, like, I don't know. I don't have a lot of clear image of like who they are. Like I think we learned a little bit about one of them near the end of this week's reading about her history with Hannah the Giant, but those characters not drawn very well, or not much, I guess I should say.
I definitely don't see them distinctly.
Yeah,
this might be a limitation of audiobook, but yeah, I don't have a firm image of them either.
Mm-hmm. So in this conversation, Jaya looks at Charlie and says, "You have to do something, Charlie. If you're the prince that was promised, you have to do something." So, Matt, do we think King is like directly and intentionally making a Song of Ice and Fire reference here? I mean, like, obviously George R. R. Martin did not invent the idea of a prophecy of a prince coming to save us all. Like that was not a original creation in the mind of Martin. And that's been around since like storytelling was created. But like the specific language, the specific use of the prince who was promised feels very intentional. And very specific in a way that I don't think I've seen that particular phrase used that particular way outside of a Game of Thrones.
Yeah, that's a good question. The first time you said the prince that was promised on the podcast, I thought you were making a joking reference to A Song of Ice and Fire. But no, that is indeed the language from the story. It's used consistently. And the reason I think it's a really interesting question is, as you know, lifetime Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire fan, of course, I think we both know at this point, certainly, the prince that was promised is sort of like the prophecy of the prince that is promised. It is sort of like a tricky, squishy thing in the story. Because in the Song of Ice and Fire, particularly in the books, prophecy never turns out the way people expect or the way they want it to. It's usually a kind of trap, or it's a form of manipulation. And I think, at least as far as the book is concerned, we're sort of being led to think something is going to happen when in fact Martin plans for something else entirely to happen because prophecy is not trustworthy. And so we have a track record of being super paranoid in this book, but I think it's very funny that he then borrows this language, which is strongly associated with this story where it's like, yeah, you're being asked to be paranoid about the prophecy.
Yeah.
The prince that was promised prophecy in Song of Ice and Fire, you should be paranoid. And I'm just like, is that another hint that we should be suspicious of this prophecy? That like the nature of this prophecy is maybe something double-edged?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm so fascinated by this prophecy because we are never told it in the book, right? Like the prophecy is never like read to us. When Charlie eventually escapes from the prison and meets up with Claudia and Woody, they're like, "Ah, yes, you are the prince who was promised. You are the heir of Adrian." Like yada yada yada, and I'm like, wait a minute here. What actually is the prophecy? We haven't seen it, so we don't actually know what it is. And I'm jumping all around here, but I really find it interesting, talking about how Charlie has transformed into this person, right? You know, we talked about the slow change of his hair color, the slow change of his eye color. It's this really interesting idea that like you can imagine this prophecy being like, and then the prince will come in the form of a blonde-haired, blue-eyed person, and instead of that happening, it's like the world is just forcing that to happen to force Charlie into this role, right? That like Charlie is not supposed to be this prophesized prince, but the world is making him the prophesized prince because, hey, you fit the bill, so we're just gonna force you into that. It's just really fascinating, and I'm not exactly sure what we're doing with it yet. There's a lot going on here with Charlie and like who he chooses to be versus who he is and all these things that I'm not quite clear on the end of yet, but it's really, really interesting stuff.
Yeah, that's a great point. He transforms into the promised prince is maybe a more accurate statement than like Charlie was the promised prince. There's also, of course, the idea that like it's his inner qualities that are actually what this world needs, and his outer qualities are just I mean, it's a fairy tale, right? So
yeah,
it's just they're less important. I don't know. I still feel like, depending on how the story ends, unfortunately, I could drastically change my mind about what the idea behind this prophecy was, and like why not just have Charlie have, you know, be physically matching the prophecy from the beginning, and then have to like hide that. Like that's totally a way the story could have gone too. So
yeah, no, you're so right. Like this is the fun thing about storytelling and like the power that a storyteller wields is like, it's not like we had to take this guy and say like, oh, he's supposed to be the prophesized one, but the prophecy was blonde haired, so we have to change his hair blonde magically. It's like, no, you could have just made him a blonde haired, blue eyed kid and then skipped all this stuff. But the idea that he's transforming, the idea that he's becoming this other person, that the world itself is turning him into this person, and furthermore, that like sometimes the things he says or the things that come out of his mouth are not coming from him. They are not his. They are coming from a different place. Seems to like insinuate perhaps that there is this kind of internal struggle going on inside Charlie between this person that Empis wants him to be and this person that he is, which is as we've seen and as we'll get reinforced here, a person with a deep dark well of darkness in there. So yeah, I mean, really, really interesting stuff that you're correct. Don't really know where it's going.
Yeah, and one final comment along the lines of what you just said about his deep dark well. It's almost like as he's been physically becoming this bright prince, internally he's been tortured and he's become much darker. So there's an inversion, sort of.
No, you're so right. Like this is what one thing. We'll get to this in just a second, but like, he's been a character that's been almost absurdly good the entire time, but incessantly talking about his bad qualities. And like, we're like, what is the arc of this character? And it seems like perhaps maybe the arc of this character is embracing his darkness, actually, which is a very big surprise.
Maybe. I still have ideas about this, but I kind of want to save it till later.
Sure. Okay. So we also hear, Matt, as Jaya is talking to Charlie, get our first look at Flight Killer. Well, actually, this is another like interesting choice, I think, here, is that our first look at Flight Killer comes from Jaya as she's like in a traumatized way, recapping what he looks like to Charlie based off her experience. And I think this is a really interesting choice that like King intentionally did not save our first look at this guy for when Charlie saw him. We get to see him through someone else's eyes first. Really interesting. I'll read this here and we can talk about it. Awful. His face is green, as if there's something wrong with him inside. Long white hair falling down his cheeks from under the crown he wears. His eyes are as big as soft-boiled eggs. It's a broad face, so wide it's hardly human. His lips are fat and red, like he was eating strawberries. That was all of him I could see. He's swaddled in a huge purple robe from the chin down, but I could see it moving, like he was holding a pet underneath. He's awful. Monstrous. Oh, man. I love that description. Very, very evocative description.
Yeah, it seems like one of the most overtly Lovecraftian things that we've seen. Like, I almost want to bet that he's going to throw off that robe at some point, and underneath that robe is going to be, you know, he's going to be a squid. You know, there's going to be tentacles. At the very least, there's going to be a bunch of limbs.
Yeah, I agree. Like the Chekhov's spooky rope. Like we need to do something with that for sure.
Yep.
What do you think though about the choice to do this through Jaya though? I really grabbed onto this for some reason, that again, like King could have just waited to see Flight Killer the first time Charlie walks out onto the field. And indeed, when Charlie does eventually walk out onto the field at the end of the day, he gets a look at Flight Killer and basically says, yep, this description that Jaya gave me matches perfectly. I don't know. I'm just really into the choice here to do this through a third party first, than through our character's eyes first.
I honestly just think this is a really good writing trick to use in general. It makes it feel more grounded in the world for it to be dialogue, for it to be in the voice of a character describing an experience, rather than just have it be our point of view character sort of, describing it internally. I think it just always makes you feel more rooted in the story, more like this is a place. And just in general, I think it's a kind of a rule of thumb that's probably good to follow, to have your characters, describe things to each other wherever possible, unless of course it's gonna strain plausibility.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. And it also like allows us, when we're seeing it through this person's perspective, we attach the emotional trauma that she's going through to the description to kind of accentuate how awful he is, right? Like it's one thing for us to be looking at him and being relayed by the narrative that he's awful, but this is a woman who just had to kill her friend, and has come back from that and is now reeling from that. And so every terrible thing about Flight Killer is enhanced by the fact that he made her do this thing.
Exactly.
And it just, it's you're a great point. I think this is great. I love this. So Charlie chats with Iota briefly, who also survived his first round. I love that, Matt, that Iota is basically just like, hey, Charlie, this like claw guy is like 100% going to kill you. Like, I know you're supposed to be the prince. I kind of believe you're the prince, but no, this guy's going to 100% kill you. But I'll fight him and I'll get him because I got him figured out. Matt, I'm curious if you discovered Claw's weakness before Charlie did. Like, I was definitely like paying very close attention, and when it did he turns to look for the bucket thing, and that is like kind of played on repeat for Charlie as he's scanning through his head. I almost immediately went to something with his vision. I was like, oh, I don't think I specifically went to the detail of, oh, he has bad peripheral vision. I think my initial gut reaction was like, oh, maybe he's just actually blind. Maybe this is like a Book of Eli situation. Oh, spoilers, I guess. Sorry.
I don't remember when that's revealed in the Book of Eli, but
the end.
Oh, really?
The very end. I'm so sorry, everyone.
That's funny. So I had a similar guess. My guess was that he was blind in one eye, because I thought the book was making more of the fact that like the pail to his left he has to turn his head to his left because the pail is to his left, and I'm like, well, maybe he can only see out of one eye, and if something comes at him from the other side, then he'll miss it. That wasn't right either. But
it's
closer, I guess. Yeah. Something with his vision. We were right about that.
Yeah, I think the book does a very good job of like, and I think King is intentionally doing this. He kind of, in my estimation, wants you to maybe not figure it out, but be on the right path like we were before Charlie gets there. It feels like that's very intentional to me.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But the most interesting part of this to me, from like a character perspective, is that Iota chooses not to tell Charlie this, right? He's like, Charlie, this guy's going to kill you. But I'm going to beat him because I've got him all figured out. But he doesn't say what his weakness is. And then when he does give him a clue about his weakness, it's like right before the fight. And then he just kind of gives a quick gesture, right? Like he does like the blinders on the side of the face thing. And I'm just so fascinated by why I chose to do it that way. Like, why do you think he chose, like, why do you think he didn't just turn to him and be like, look, kid, here's what I learned about him. Use this and you'll be able to defeat him.
I think the thing about Iota that makes him unique among the other characters is like, he is the doubter. He's kind of the doubting Thomas of the group. Out of all the survivors, where he really wants to believe, but he is unable to fully believe that Charlie is the prince. And so I think what Iota is doing is testing him
Mm-hmm.
He could, like, the test could have been just like, well, I'll just let him go, and if he lives, then he's probably the prince. But because he so wants it to be true, he's like, god damn it, I gotta tell him this one little clue.
Yeah. I kind of imagine him waffling internally on this back and forth, like he's like, I want to tell him, and like, this is why at the very last minute he does it. It's just like, he can't help himself at the very last minute. He just has to give him one little clue. And then, yeah, I think there is a test to it going on here for sure, that like, the real prince would be able to figure this out and defeat him. And Charlie does not disappoint.
Another thing about Iota is simply his name. I can't think of anybody else's name that is like meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
Except I guess like the Galleons, but Iota is just a word that means like a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's just such an interesting choice for a name. And he even has this nickname, and it's just like, what are we doing with his name? What does that mean? I don't know.
I mean, it is really kind of ironic that I is the one that tells him about the sight weakness of his enemy. That's a little,
it's a fairy tale.
Fun play on words there.
Yeah,
but I mean, I think you're right that Iota is such an evocative name, and it a different name from like everyone else in this group, and it causes you to kind of pay attention to it a little bit more.
I love the idea that his name is I, and it's like, if you were telling a fairy tale, then it would totally be like, I is the one who said the thing about the eyes, and that makes sense.
Yeah. All right, so we get to this part as Charlie is kind of staring at Claw before the match starts. This is a little bit long, but I think it's really important, so I'll read it and we'll talk about it. He's trying to psych me out, I thought. Of course, I'd already known that, but the actual words for what he was doing brought it into focus, made it concrete. Words have that power, and they opened something inside of me, a hole, maybe even a well. It was the same thing that had opened during my nasty outings with Bertie Bird and during my confrontations with Christopher Polly and Peterkin the Dwarf. If I was a prince, it certainly wasn't of the kind where the movie ended when the vapidly pretty blonde guy embraced the vapidly pretty girl. There was nothing pretty about my dirt-caked blonde hair, and my battle with Claw wouldn't be pretty either. It might be short, but it wouldn't be pretty. I thought, I don't want to be a Disney prince. To hell with that. If I have to be a prince, I want to be a dark one. Stop looking at me, fuckface, I said. His smile was replaced by a look of surprised puzzlement, and I realized why even before I threw my drumstick at him. It was because that word, fuckface, came from the well, came out in English, and he hadn't understood it. So, lots to talk about here, Matt. This is, I think, questions we asked ourselves over and over again throughout the course of this book. Why did everything with Birdie matter? Why did we keep harping on these things? What were we doing with Charlie's interactions with Christopher Polly, who it now seems like is not going to come back into the novel at some point? Peterkin will make a brief and unsuccessful return later in the chapters. And I think my estimation at this point now is it's all building to this moment, to this well of darkness that has been inside of Charlie from the beginning that he is now tapping into. And I think one of the things that's really fascinating to me about this is by doing this, it feels like Charlie has kind of broken the rules of Empis, because like we had this established thing where when Charlie first got to this place, if he tried to say a word that didn't exist in the language of Empis, he would not be able to. His body would not be able to say the word. Like it wouldn't come to him. And in some instances, and then in other instances, it seems like things would be auto-translated. So words that didn't have any meaning in his language would be auto-translated back to him. And the assumption is when he's saying things to other people, it's auto-translated into their language. But then we have this moment where he basically says, I'm not going to be the prince who has promised that this fairy tale world wants me to be. I'm going to be my own version of self. I'm going to be the dark prince. I'm going to tap into this well. And this word that comes from this well, fuckface, is going to come out in my language. It is going to be English that this is said in. That's really, really interesting. Charlie has essentially like hacked the fairy tale, right?
Yeah, he's bringing in something from his world, right, as a kind of weapon, just like a gun, right? Like a gun and the word fuckface are two things from our world that he employs to kind of break the frame of the fairy tale.
Yeah.
And skew things to his advantage. I do want to somewhat tongue in cheek talk about the word fuckface for a second.
Okay, sure.
Because like I always remember when I was relatively young, I read Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash, and he's talking about some word in Japanese in that book, and he's like, and it was basically untranslatable, just like the word fuckface is untranslatable from English. But I'll do my best here. And I remembered that. And then years later, I watched Pulp Fiction. Not Pulp Fiction, Kill Bill. And in Kill Bill, one of the Japanese characters says something to another character in Japanese, and the subtitle says fuckface. And I was like, that's funny because he didn't say fuckface. I don't know what he said, but that's not a Japanese word. And now here we have fuckface again as like an untranslatable concept appearing in the story and being said in English because it can't be said in Impasarian. And I just think it's very funny that this word keeps cropping up in my life.
I love this. That's really, really great.
I like your notion that he's hacked the fairy tale, though. I didn't quite see it that way, but I sort of adopted that as soon as you said that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I'm 100% right about this. And one thing I am definitely not sure of is what we're doing with this, right? Because obviously we're getting a lot of intentional comparisons between Charlie and Eldon, right? We talked about this a couple weeks ago. I think we see more of these here. You know, even just the idea that he's pulling from this deep dark well, which is the same thing Eldon pulled from to get Gog-Magog and fuck this whole thing up, right? Like the parallels are there. But are we ultimately saying like that's bad and that's what you're doing there, Charlie, is the way to destruction? Because like it seems like whenever he pulls from this well, like he's able to win, right? Like, I mean, you brought up the gun. Yes, the two different guns will be instrumental in their escape from and return to Lilimar, right? Like they defeat one giant and then defeat another with the tools and the magic of Charlie's world. So I'm very torn on what I think we're ultimately like thematically doing with this Charlie reaching into this deep dark well of darkness thing. I'm not sure yet.
So I think I have a prediction. This is kind of what I was going to mention a minute ago. So like, I don't necessarily want to invoke Ka here because this is its own story, which has like its own fairy tale logic. Mm-hmm. But let's just say the fairy tale logic is similar to the logic of Ka, where like Charlie has been drawn to this world for a purpose, sure. Which is a classic king idea, right?
Yeah.
So like what is the purpose? What does the purpose have in mind for a kid who tragically lost his mom and had to grow up way too fast, sort of didn't have a childhood? What does this kid have that other 17-year-olds don't have? And the answer is there's kind of two things that are remarkable about Charlie. One of them is, yeah, he has this anger, he has this darkness, he has this dark well, mm-hmm. He has this competitiveness. He's a giant athletic human being. But also, the thing we've mentioned more often is that like he's very carefully managed this darkness due to the fact that he has this really good soul, this incredibly powerful conscience, mm-hmm. this deep goodness. And both of those things are important. And I think the climax of the story, the emotional climax, is going to be like, okay, what's it going to be? Are we going to reach into the dark well and do the hard thing, do the dark thing that needs to be done?
Sure.
Or are we going to, is it going to be Charlie listening to the cricket, the literal cricket on his literal shoulder and like doing some act of grace or forgiveness or charity or faith or something instead of doing the dark thing? And like that, and that's kind of I see that as being the structure of Charlie's character. I think I've actually come around to seeing Charlie as just as an amazing character because he has this like dichotomy to him, but it's a very believable dichotomy to me.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think I saw some people complaining about how Charlie's kind of almost like too perfect, and the book is beating this drum about how like Charlie is the best, but also constantly talking about how shitty he is. And it's like, we get it, we get it, we get it. But I think you're right. As the story has played out, this has become enjoyably complex in a way that I'm really on board for. This idea that he is this person constantly wrestling with this thing inside of him, and I want to put a pin in that and come back to it when we get a little bit more of the backstory of Eldon. And I think an interesting thing we're doing with Stephen King and his look and view on evil, which I think in this book is slightly more complicated. That's the wrong word. I think he's slightly changed how he feels about evil, based on this book. And I think that's interesting, and I want to dive into that with you, but I think it's better to wait till we get there. All right. So finally, it's the last set of the night. Claw versus Charlie, which, by the way, I just can't get over this name Claw, Matt. Like, I know we talked about this a couple weeks ago, but Claw, just what a name. What a name.
Love it.
The two are brought out onto the pitch, and Charlie gets his own first look at Flight Killer. And as we said, it pretty much matches with the description that he got earlier. He also sees Red Molly, Matt, who is big. She's big lady, large, scary.
Yeah. I thought we might do something more like complicated and subtle with Red Molly, but no, not really.
Speaking of unsure of what we're doing, we get another view of this woman Petra, who is like this kind of the right hand woman to Eldon, right? This, like, she's always there, she's with him, she's incredibly evil, we're told, like cackling madly and enjoying the violence of all this stuff. I just find this really interesting because this woman has been harped on by the book a lot so far, right? Like we've brought her up, we've dropped her name several times, and so far it's just like she's just some evil woman that's loyal to Eldon and nothing more than that. And I just find it interesting the amount of real estate she's got in the book, and so far is just that. Like, is something more going on with this woman that hasn't been revealed yet? What do you think?
I mean, maybe a stretch, but I feel like a lot of the bad stuff that's been going on is really her fault. Like, I feel like the being that is now Flight Killer is not doing a lot of governing. He doesn't seem like a planner.
Sure.
Like, I think she's the power behind the throne, and he's just kind of there being evil and magic. But I don't know. It's interesting because she does seem to be really bad. Like, it doesn't seem like she's like afraid of him, and he has her cowed, and that's why she's acting this way. It's like, no, she just seems awful. So
yeah, I mean, I like what you said there, and I think you're onto something there. I do think it would be interesting if like that's the case, and that it's not that it hasn't been revealed, but just like we haven't focused on that, and the book's almost over. So it just feels like if that's what we wanted to do and have this there's a person behind the person, actually, you'd think we would have brought her more prevalent into the actual goings on than rather just have her this background evil lady character. I don't know.
I agree with you that it's kind of strange, but I do feel like this story. So what I know you wanted to set aside the conversation about evil, but like that, she just seems to be evil. Like,
yes.
Like there's nothing about how she's been characterized so far makes me think like, well, maybe she has her reasons. She's bad.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so finally, with Charlie reaching deep down into his dark well, eager to do some violence, the match begins. It's brutal, Matt, but relatively quick, with Charlie kind of continually dancing into Claw's peripheral vision and eventually downing him. There's this moment at the end, though, where Claw, he's been mortally wounded and he's about to go, but before he does, he declares Charlie his prince, right? But does that stop Charlie?
It does not. Charlie still murks his ass. So
he totally does. Yeah.
So that's something.
I mean, I'm kind of done like reading too much into stuff like that. Like, I really don't think that the resolution of this book is going to be, and then Charlie becomes the new Flight Killer. Like, I just don't think that's going to happen. So I'm not like, oh, where Stephen King is indicating that Charlie is going to go bad. No, I don't think that's what we're doing. I think it's just, this is perhaps, I mean, ultimately this is what this world needs. Not Prince Charming, but like Prince Gun, who's ultimately a good person, but but with the strength and power to do what's necessary at times, which is very gunslingery, right? Like I think that's the thing we haven't quite said yet, is that's very gunslinger-esque.
Totally. Yeah. And the story was pretty explicit that if Charlie hadn't killed him, then Charlie would have been killed. So
I'm not saying like Charlie should have done the noble thing and said, no, I will not grant him mercy. Like I'm just kind of done with that kind of conspiracy type of analysis at this point.
Right.
Charlie is led back down, and everyone is disappointed that he didn't die. All the bad people, but they are happy. I think it's specifically I forget which of the skeleton men says to him, "Don't worry, next time you'll fight your friend. You got to fight your enemy this time. Next time it'll be your friend." It's Aaron that says that. It's Aaron the skeleton that says that. But the remaining prisoners, Matt, take the sign that he managed to survive fighting this big giant monster as this is it. He's the prince. Anyone that was not quite convinced yet sees he walks down the tunnel, survived. They kneel down in front of him, and he's the prince now. So, hooray! Yep,
there it is.
So our chapter ends with Charlie asking I if he thinks the rest of them would follow him to escape if there was a way. And I is like, are you stupid? Of course, they all think you're the prince now. Yes, 100% yes.
Yeah. He just kind of needs to be talked into it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Charlie does.
Yes, he does. He's still not completely ready to actually pick this mantle up and put it on his proverbial head.
Yeah.
All right, Matt, chapter 25, a banquet, I receive a visitor, inspiration doesn't knock, who wants to live forever? So the chapter starts, Matt, with as a reward for not dying, the 16 remaining prisoners get a feast. It's stew and pies and fruit and all kinds of deliciousness. Murder is as we see in Empus, rewarded. Hooray.
Yeah, it's a dark fairy tale.
Yeah. Inside his pie, Charlie finds a pencil and paper, which end up being very useful for him later. But at this point, this is my question for you, Matt. Like, what does Percy know and not know? Like, because it just seems like I'm just going to get you a pencil and paper just in case you need to, I don't know, like attach a note to a cricket. It just, like, was he just like, I think this kid's gonna probably need a pencil and paper, so I'm gonna go ahead and smuggle him some. I don't know. What do you think?
I like some of it is just like fairy tale logic. Like it's like this is the thing that would happen in the fairy tale, is that the child or whatever who is locked in the cage would be given a pencil and paper by the helpful creature, and then they would later use that to their advantage. Like, so I mean, to answer your actual question, like I don't actually think that Percy knew about the snab. I think he just wanted to give Charlie an ability to communicate his escape plans. There's a lot of like reading between the lines, I think, that we do that we kind of have to do with Percy specifically, because he's we just know nothing about him. We just have to assume like this is a guy who probably came from nobility, or at least not from nobility per se, but like he grew up in this civilized world and was educated, and now he's in this terrible position, and he really believes in this prince who was promised prophecy, and he's taking a big risk. We just have to read between the lines for all this, though. So.
Yeah, and that's I think the one thing that we didn't get resolved this week that hopefully we'll find out next week is what happens to this guy, because it doesn't seem like it's looking good for him, right? His stuck his neck out, instrumental to Charlie's escape and everything that happens after that, but seems like things are going bad for him. So I'm really, really invested in him and what's going to happen here.
Me too. Unfortunately, I think he's actually not going to make it. But
100%.
I love his character. I love the idea of this character. It's funny how invested I am in this character when he hasn't, done or said much really.
Yeah, and I think this is important actually, because this is one thing, like Charlie is perceived by everyone around him as this incredibly magical, powerful person. And it's mostly, not entirely, but mostly because of the things other people around him are doing for him, right? Like Charlie says, like, "Hey, we're gonna escape. There's a tunnel here," and everyone's like, "Whoa! How'd you know that, Prince Charlie, the prince who was promised?" And like the reality is just like, "Oh, this guy told me." Like it's like this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, right? Like people think he's the prince, and so they aid him, and because he gets aid, people think he's the prince.
Yeah, I didn't think much about that, but that's a really good point.
It's really interesting. I'm not sure what to make of it, but it is really interesting. I can't wait to have like our overview episode on this book and look back on all this stuff and say, were we doing anything with this, or is this just things to muse on that weren't really the main drive of the story?
Yeah. Here's another thing that I'm sure is nothing, is just the fact that Percy's name is Percy.
Percival?
Which, well, Percival, yes, but also Percy is the name of the demon from like 2 books ago or whatever.
Oh gosh,
that's what I mean when I say it's nothing, is I'm sure there's no connection, but it jumps out to me as like Percy. It's a unique name, right? So I don't know. Anyway,
I mean, I don't think we've said this explicitly, but like Percival, the name, like is like one of the Knights of the Round Table in Arthurian legend, right? Like right. Percival, I'm pretty sure, it's been a while since I've read those stories, but I'm pretty sure that's where Percival comes from. So it's like we're setting this guy up very specifically.
Yeah, he's
to be
important.
this noble like hero.
Yeah.
All right, so the general problem Charlie has at this moment right now, Matt, is that he knows the way out of here. He knows there's a door in the officiant's room, but he has to find a way to get past the skeleton guards in order to get there. Charlie dreams again at this moment of Leia with his mother's hairdryer, which is a clue for how to solve this problem. And Matt, like, when did you clock the whole like electricity and therefore weak to water thing? Did you get this before Charlie did, or about the same time he did?
I think a little bit before he did, but not this early. And then I did get it a few ticks before he did, but even then I felt dumb because I was like, we've been primed on the Wizard of Oz so many times, and the idea of throwing water it should have been right there, right?
I am going to be completely honest with you that I did get the water electricity thing at about this moment. Like it was this dream with the hair dryer being reinforced again. I'm like, oh, we're doing like a water electricity thing. But the Wizard of Oz part of it literally did not occur to me until I was putting the script together for this episode. Like I just sitting there, I was like, oh yeah, it's like how he kills the witch.
Yeah.
Or how Dorothy kills the witch in the Wizard of Oz. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot more explosive than that, but we'll get there.
Yeah.
So Charlie is awoken from his dream by the gas jet in the prison room falling out of its slot, and out of it comes, well, it's a red cricket, Matt. Hey, look, it's Charlie's good deed being repaid here as a red cricket comes. We'll talk more about the snab later. I don't know why I said it like that. I'm sorry.
Please say it like that every time.
We'll do. But for now, Charlie finds a note and some dog hair glued to its bottom. The note is from Claudia, who wants Charlie to know that the dog is safe, and if he's alive and well, if there's anything they can do to help. So, Matt, what was your reaction to the arrival of our prodigal red cricket?
Well, I mean, I guess the first thing to say about the reaction is that, like, it's funny because when we first met this giant red cricket, we were just like, yep, it's a big cricket. Not a surprising thing to encounter in a fantasy fairy tale world.
Sure.
And then I didn't think about it again for a second. And then it turns out like, no, that wasn't just a big red cricket. Those aren't in this world. This is the big red cricket, one of a kind, instantly recognizable to all Impessians. This is the snab. And I was like, oh, I didn't see that coming, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, no. I think I can't remember what we said when the cricket went away. If we were like, "Oh, that's going to pay off in some way later." I think I had that feeling. I don't think the feeling was that the cricket is the god or the king of the small creatures in Empus, and will come back later to telepathically communicate with Charlie and save him from prison. I don't think I went there at all.
No, the idea of us like a cricket being the king of all animals is very unusual to me. But
Yeah,
at the same time, like a lot of stuff in this story does have that sort of ineffable feeling of like, if this detail had been in a fairy tale that I heard when I was like 5, I would have just been like, yep, that's exactly the kind of thing that happens in fairy tales. So
you're so right. It's just so random and weird enough to be like perfectly at home in this story.
magic beans and red cricket.
There we go. There we go. All right, so the plan and the timing is set. The day of the next round, as he tells the rest of them they need to come next time the field lights are up, and only to come if they have a lot of them. But again, he still has the pesky problem of how to get past the guards. And Charlie's loyal subjects are starting to get a little impatient with him as he hasn't come up with an actual plan for that. But fortunately, Matt, he has push-ups and Van Helsing. And I want to talk to you about this, Matt, because I think this is hilarious. Like King, his mind does this thing. The aha moment where Charlie puts all this together and realizes the weakness and how they can exploit it comes to him via something he remembers from when he read Dracula as a boy. You would think if someone says, this reminds me of the time where I read Dracula, you would think it would be like something about Dracula or about vampires or about fear or about like any of the things you think of in your head when you say Dracula. But no, not with Stephen King, this book obsessed storyteller with this steel trap of a mind. What he says is, I remember this one time in the book Dracula where Van Helsing says that King Laugh didn't knock but only barged in. and that reminded me of this time where, oh yeah, this idea suddenly burst into my brain. And it's like, Steven, like, I mean, this is something that like this is just Stephen King has this, for whatever reason, this thing in Dracula when he read it, like stuck with him, right? Like that's just what this is, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it just you remembered this, thought, yeah, that kind of fits here. I'm going to say that Charlie remembers this in this moment. Yeah,
I just like I've read Dracula. I read it. It's a good book. Did I remember this scene? No, of course I didn't.
I haven't, but now that I know that it has gold like this in there, definitely gonna read it.
Just wait. I mean, you're gonna read it and get to the scene, and like what King has done is now you're gonna remember. Van Helsing says that King Laugh didn't knock but only barged in. You're gonna remember that for the rest of your life.
Yes, I will.
So the inspiration that slams the door open is Charlie realizes that if the skeletons put off this electric aura, they perhaps might have some of electricity's weakness. Which means like you would be safe in Empus at nighttime as long as it was raining out.
Yeah. Don't think too much about it. It's a fairy tale. So.
The next morning, Matt has sausages for breakfast, which means it's game time. And Charlie finds a match in his food. Once again, like Percival's help, it just like is instrumental to everything that Charlie accomplishes. Like again, this is what I was talking about earlier, where they're like, it's really dark down this tunnel and there's a lamp here, but how can we get out? We don't have matches. And Charlie just pulls out a match and everyone's like, oh, wow, you are the prince. And it's just because Percival gave him a match.
Yeah. I think Percival, like more and more, I feel like Percival is the unsung hero of the story. And it's going to be really sad when he dies.
Yeah, you're right. No one's gonna write songs about him. It's gonna
Yeah,
be about wonderful Charlie.
that's right.
So as Charlie is being brought to the locker room by Aaron, he speaks to Aaron. Well, Matt, something speaks. Traitor, I said. Traitor to all you swore. The smile disappeared from what was left of his humanity. Beneath it, the skull grinned its eternal grin. He raised his limber stick, meaning to bring it down on my face, splitting it from hairline to chin. I stood waiting for it, even turning my face up a little to receive the blow. Something else had spoken through me, and it had spoken true words. So again, like we're seeing this kind of manipulation of Charlie, right? Like Prince Charlie is talking here, not Charlie from Otherworld.
Yeah, that was my take. It's the being that is the prince, whatever that means, has spoken through him.
Yeah, at this point, I'm not even sure Charlie knows that all the night soldiers are like former like royal guardsmen that have betrayed and abandoned their charge. Like I think that's something he learned a little bit later. So yeah, like this isn't even knowledge coming from him. So something is moving through him here.
Right.
All right, Matt, the second round matches are set, but hey, they don't really matter because no one's going to be fighting this round. They collect a bunch of washing buckets left for each of them and wait as the skeleton guards slowly arrive. Matt, I do love this moment so much. We talked about the Dorothy and Wicked Witch of it all, but like just how this sets up this moment that they throw the water on the guards and they don't just die, they explode, but like in the xenomorph way where they fling like they're so powerful that even killing them damages people around them because they fling shards of shrapnel bone every which way, like throwing bone chips everywhere that impale several people. Like it's so great, isn't it? Like this whole thing, like I'm so satisfied with everything that happens here.
Yeah, it was great. I think it's funny because we kind of predicted. I think we both called the idea that he was going to use water against them, but I don't think either of us anticipated that they would explode. Which means like you get to kind of pat yourself on the back for predicting, but then you still get surprised. Like you're still a little bit caught off guard. I think that's a good spot to aim for when it comes to like trying to cultivate a fun little surprise. Like make it guessable, but then have a little twist on it.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's really, really fun. So Charlie escapes into the patches and locks the door behind him. Our chapter ends with Charlie channeling Turner Classic Movies as he says, "Come on, you sons of bitches, do you want to live forever?" Which, okay. It's really funny. Really funny. So obviously the first thing that you and I both thought of when we heard this quote was Starship Troopers, right?
Of course.
There was a hot second where I was like, do they play Starship Troopers on Turner Classic Movies? Is it that old of a movie that it's a Turner Classic movie now? Well, not entirely. So I did a little research here, Matt, and this quote is supposedly comes from a Sergeant Major Daniel Daly. You're welcome. You're welcome. Who, according to legend, said this during the Battle of Blau Wood in World War I. Although, like with anything, like you dig into this a little bit deeper, and it turns out no one ever actually recorded him say that. It was just a journalist who perhaps embellished a little bit to make a better story, and it just became legend. And now this guy is responsible for saying it. I believe the movie that Charlie is referencing here is a film called The Wood of Fair Water. is a short film, part of a short film collection that this scene and him saying this appeared in. But yeah, I mean, in retrospect, like Verhoeven using this quote in Starship Troopers was part of everything that film is doing, right? It's kind of perfect.
Yeah.
But I don't know what to do with it here. Like it just seems so out of the blue here that like part of me just wants to chop it up as like maybe King Saul was like watching TCM himself and saw this quote and was like, I'm going to put this in my book. And there's nothing more to it than that. That's all it is. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. And in this case, I actually think this is more of his like bringing some of the darkness and grittiness from our world as a weapon into this world where like to them, somebody saying that kind of thing is like, oh my God, what an incredibly brave and bold leader.
Yeah.
It's Yeah, it just makes him seem, you know, that was off the dome, Charlie. You just came up with that. It's like, no, that's one of the most famous sayings in my world, but I get to I get to take credit for it. It's like that scene in Reign of Fire when Christian Bale pretends to have thought up the plot of Star Wars.
Yeah. It's also like that one movie where the Beatles no longer exist and the guy just writes all the Beatles songs.
Exactly.
Yesterday, yeah. I think it was called. Yeah. No, it's fun. It's funny. I enjoyed it, and I really thought that perhaps Starship Troopers appears on Turner Classic Movies. I think this is Matt. This is one of those things that, like, you know, we had conversations early on in this book about whether this guy, this Charlie, sounds like a kid of this current generation, and like, again, like, for all the reasons why we already pointed out, that doesn't necessarily matter. I will say that Charlie's encyclopedic knowledge of stories and also classic film is almost, to me, pushing against my suspension of disbelief a little bit here. Just a little bit. Like, I understand, like, the King laid the groundwork here that said, like, Charlie spent a lot of time watching classic films with his father. Like, that's what they did together. That was, like, part of their time they spent together. I get it. There's established precedent for this, but, like, we're really kind of pushing up against it a little bit here.
Yeah, there's just kind of only so many times you can say to yourself, like, well, he's an old soul. Like, yeah, but also he's being written by an old soul.
Yeah. Yes, very much so.
It doesn't really bother me that much, though.
Like I said, like, we have not breached my suspension of disbelief, but we're just, like, pushing up against it a little bit.
Yeah.
All right, chapter 26, the tunnel and the station, scratching, the trolley house, Red Molly, the welcoming party, a mother's grief. The team heads into the tunnel, which we learn is an old way for the officials to escape when the crowd gets rowdy, which paints a picture of what this place was like before the collapse, right? Like, we have this kind of picturesque view of Empus before Flight Killer took over and killed everything. But even that, we see, like, it wasn't this perfect fairy tale place, right? They needed an escape hatch for their referees when the crowd got too rowdy. Like, it's basically like Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And I can say that because I'm an Eagles fan.
That's great.
I just think that's interesting that, like, we are getting these little bits and pieces that, like, even in the before time, this was not this fairy tale world, right? It was not this perfect world of brightness and wonder and nothing bad ever happened. That's not the case, and we'll continue to see that too, right? As we learn more about the Galleons, we'll see that it's a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah, exactly.
So the tunnel leads to the trolley house, which is near the main gate, and I wanted to point this out for you. Save your breath to cool your porridge, I growled. It might have been porridge, as in the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. It might have been soup. I feel like, and maybe this is just misconception on my point, let me know what you think, but I feel like the mistranslations that Charlie is experiencing and the rate at which he's experiencing them and pointing them out to us has accelerated in frequency a little bit. Am I wrong there? What do you think?
I mean, now that you pointed out, I see what you're talking about. It could also be like his awareness of the fact that he is processing their language in this weird way has amplified over time. Because like I really don't know if it's like he's physically hearing the word porridge in his brain, or if it's more like he's just getting the idea of what they said inserted into his head. And like, cause those are kind of overlapping things, but kind of different things. And it also kind of doesn't matter. So I haven't really pushed on it too hard.
Okay. Yeah. Fair.
But like, yeah, it's like he's becoming more aware of the fact that it's that he's simply not hearing English words.
Yeah. No, I like that. I like that as an explanation that he's just kind of more in tuned to that idea. All right, so finally they burst into the trolley house, which is filled with horrible, horrible bats. Matt, this is like, you have to tell me if you think I'm reaching here, but the bats caused me to briefly think about and compare this with Charlie's original journey into Empus. And, like, I'm trying to think. There is this idea in the hero's journey, in stories like this, in fairy tale, in fairy stories, of the crossing of the threshold. Right. We talked about this when Charlie first entered Empus and went through this underground tunnel to arrive in this new place. Um, this is in essence a recreation of that. They go through this long underground tunnel, they emerge outside this tunnel, they have to go through this bat filled cave and emerge outside into this new place. Are we seeing intentionally another kind of crossing of the threshold moment being created for us here? Am I going kind of too crazy with this? What do you think?
I don't think so at all. I think out of all of the King stories we've read, this might be the one with the cleanest hero's journey interpretation. Mm-hmm. And I think, the point here, the point on the classic hero's journey here would be that Charlie went into the Abyss, which is one of the stations of the hero's journey, which is this prison. And in the prison, he undergoes death and rebirth. Because when Charlie entered, he was just Charlie, and now that he's leaving, he's the prince. He's been reborn, and you could say he's entering the world for the first time as the prince, actually. So again, we note that, we mirror that moment when he first entered the world as Charlie by having the bats be there. I actually don't think this is a reach at all, and I'm kind of glad you brought this up, because King doesn't usually do hero's journeys at all, like zero.
Mm-hmm. True.
But I really think this is somewhat self-consciously aping the structure of stories like that, on purpose.
Now, I'm glad you said that and pointed that out, because you made me think about the moment where I think it's in a chapter or two where he talks about his time in the deep Malign, and he calls it his chrysalis, his cocoon, right? He went down there and he was forged into something else, and I think that connects exactly what you're saying here. And so, yeah, I like this. I think this is now the imagery makes total sense to me, and we are intentionally contrasting and comparing these two moments.
Yeah.
All right, so I wanted to talk to you about this. So they're looking around the trolley house and they're seeing all the old trolleys, and we get this. On the sides of one, I could see in gold flake were words decidedly out of vogue in Empus these days: friendship, amity, kindness, and love. I really think we are intentionally, Matt, setting up this world where perhaps many of the people, Leia being one of them, saw it as this magical fairy tale world, but the people living in it perhaps didn't. Because, yeah, those are like great goals to reach for, but like, was that what Empus was even before Flight Killer and Gog Magog? Like, doesn't seem like it. Like, we just talked about how they have this incredibly violent sporting event that they all love to go to that is not as bad as the fair one, but like a slightly tamer version of it. And when it goes bad, the crowd wants to hurt the refs so bad that they have to escape via escape hatch. Like, this is not this place, right? Like, this is maybe the idealized version of this place, is these words, these codes. But Empus is not that.
Yeah, right. I mean, we have, civic slogans painted on our buildings too.
Sure, yeah.
They're aspirational. They're not descriptive. I agree that it's
right.
It's a more complicated world than what some of these characters might want it to be. I agree with that. Yeah.
I feel like the reason why King points this out to us now is not just to have this contrast with how things in Empus are now, but to also kind of in a subtle way point out the hypocrisy of this at any time in the history of this place.
Sure. Yeah.
So they burst out of the trolley house and into the outside world and find skeletons and Red Molly waiting for them. Fortunately, Matt, Charlie is right near where he ditched his backpack on his mad dash out of the city, and inside that backpack, we find a gun. Charlie is sneaking to go get his gun, but before he does, Peterkin returns and informs Red Molly of Charlie's location. She charges towards him, and Peterkin happens to be in her way, and so she punches him so hard he rips in two. I gotta be honest, Matt, I laughed out loud at this moment. What did you think about the triumphant end of Peterkin?
I loved it. I love this as a kind of grimdark version of the fairy tale of
Mm-hmm.
like Charlie points out here. We're sort of hitting that Rumpelstiltskin beat, but we're also making it kind of a king beat, and it's very fun.
Yeah, I mean, like, let's not forget that one of the versions of Rumpelstiltskin, after his name is discovered, he rips himself in two, right? Like, we are literally hitting that beat here.
Right.
So
yeah, and he did rip himself into, right, by calling
yeah,
attention to himself.
yep. So I enjoyed it. Is that wrong? Should I feel bad about enjoying it? No, I should not. This guy sucked. I'm glad he's ripped in two.
I agree.
So Molly goes to attack Charlie, but Amit stands in her way and pays for it, getting punched through the face. How do you feel about this, Matt? I mean, obviously there's this moment where, like, what we're selling here is that this guy who this very kind of classic arc of a character who, when he first met Charlie, he was kind of an asshole. He pushed him over just to do it, or pushed someone else over just to do it. He was kind of the antagonist of the group before Claw came. And now we see the end of his arc is not only is he fully convinced of the prince who was promised thing, but he is ready and willing to sacrifice his life for that said prince. It is a little sad though, because like if he had just walked out of the way, he would be alive. Like his death was needless and meaningless in a way.
I felt that way too. Like it's not like Charlie desperately needed one extra second.
Yeah.
As far as I remember. Yeah, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, Charlie was good. Like in fact, he tells him, "Hey, get out of the way, get out of the way."
Yeah.
I do just love the writing of this as he empties this clip into Red Molly. In the War of the Worlds, our most sophisticated weapon didn't do much to stop the rampaging Martians. It was earthly germs that killed them. I don't think any single bullet from Polly's little gun did for Red Molly. Not even all 8, which was every cartridge left in the clip. I think she pulled her broken teeth down her throat and choked on them. Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
Yeah. It was very gross and felt like it belonged in the game Space Marine 2 that I'm currently playing. No, I loved it. It's great.
It's very good. I don't want to do this again, but do 17-year-old children think about War of the Worlds?
Starring Tom Cruise.
No, see, that's the thing is, if I could believe legitimately that he was thinking of the Steven Spielberg, Tom Cruise version of War of the Worlds, I would be okay with it. But like, I guarantee you, he's thinking of the Turner Classic Movies original War of the Worlds that he watched with his dad one time. Like, Charlie.
Yeah, it's funny. I just love Charlie so much. I put up with all this because Charlie's really grown on me. He's become very dear to me.
Totally fair. I am pointing these things out mostly in jest. Like, none of this bothers me. It's just like very funny. It's like, oh, now we're gonna reference the War of the Worlds. Okay, Charlie, you just kind of know everything, huh? You've read every single book and watched every single movie in the world, huh? That's by 17.
Yeah. Right. It is funny because when I was a kid, I read War of the Worlds when I was pretty young.
Yeah, but you're weird.
And the rest of that point is like I didn't also read Dracula and Lovecraft and like I didn't read every book. By the time I was a lot, but I didn't read every book that exists, which Charlie has. So that's okay. It's okay.
So Molly is defeated, but the rest of the night soldiers are still charging towards Charlie, too close for him to run away. He decides to stand his ground, ready to go down fighting. When, Matt, Deus Ex Butterfly. They're here. The Monarchs dive bomb into the Night Soldiers, and the power of the Galleon family defeats them all, except for Kellen, who gets away, that son of a bitch.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to talk about this briefly because this is a word we've used before, I think, in our time with Stephen King and Kingslingers, and that word is Eucatastrophe. This is a term that Tolkien invented. Basically, what it means, folks, if you don't remember when we talked about it last time, this is a great sudden turn of fortune for our character that saves them. That is this. Like this is a perfect almost textbook definition of what Eucatastrophe is. Like, it is our character on the verge of death, our character surrounded with nothing left, and then suddenly this incredible symbol and force of good appears from nowhere and helps defeat the enemy. I mean, like, the other thing is, you can think of as, if you want to go Tolkien with it, you can think of the Eagles, the arrival of the Eagles at the end of Lord of the Rings, as a Eucatastrophic event.
Yeah.
I love this concept. I love this idea. I like it's one of my favorite things that Tolkien came up with, and I think this is such a perfect place for it, right? Because it doesn't just like calling it a Deus Ex Machina is to me almost like insulting, because it doesn't just like solve a problem that King had written himself into. No, what it does is like definitively like state and declare the power of the monarchy still exists. This power is here, and Flight Killer was called Flight Killer because he killed all the butterflies, right? That was what we were told. We knew that wasn't true, but I don't think we knew as like at what extreme level that wasn't true, because they're not only are there still butterflies, but there are millions of butterflies still.
Yeah, and they're on Charlie's side.
Yep. It's a really, really great moment. Charlie sprints for the gate and finds Matt. He finds his doggy. Matt.
This is all we wanted.
Yeah, it is. And I'm just going to say this. I'm just going to say this again. Steve, don't you fucking dare. Don't you fucking dare, Steve. There was a moment where later in the next chapter where Charlie's like, Radar, this time you're going to stay home. And I'm like, oh, thank fucking God. And then the dog comes and he's like, all right, fine. And I'm like, no, don't you dare. Don't you dare do this to me.
He can't do this to us.
Oh, he can do it. I'm scared. I'm so scared.
Me too.
I don't want this to happen. All right. Charlie finds Claudia, Woody, and Leia and an army of Greys waiting for them on the other side of the gate. Matt, I wonder what you think about this, because like this was the moment, and maybe it wasn't, maybe just for me and everyone else had figured this out before me, but this was the moment that I realized, oh, this is where the book is going to end. Like, not obviously not this very minute, right? But like, we're not going to travel to another place. We're not going to go back to our world and then come back to Empis after that. We're not going to see Seafront or some of the other worlds that are kind of offhandedly referenced. It was like, this is it. We escaped from prison, and the climax of the book is going to take place here, right here. This is it. And I was a little surprised by that. And I'm wondering what you think.
I mean, yeah, I guess I'm leaning more and more toward Charlie never leaving this place.
Okay.
Meaning Empis.
Yeah.
And
yeah, you said that a couple weeks ago.
And so the reason I bring that up here is like that really cuts down the amount of denouement that we have to do for the rest of the story. Like, we defeat Flight Killer, and then he takes his place here, and then the story's over. Whereas I know this is a very kind of dry and mechanical way of approaching your question, but like I do kind of think about like the pacing as being part of the storytelling. So I mean, he could still go home. I can see that working too. I just and in fact, it's funny because when we started talking about the hero's journey, I realized like, well, universally the last step of the hero's journey is you return home. You return. Yeah. You are changed and you return. So that it would be a deviation from a standard hero's journey if he doesn't actually return home. But anyway, I wanted to mention something that Discord user JDubes said. That they remarked that if Charlie is really becoming the prince, meaning he's sort of becoming a creature of Empis, then maybe that means that the air of our world would become toxic to him, and that's why he couldn't physically return home.
Oh, hey, that's fun.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, no, that's 100% true. Yeah, I like that.
I didn't think of that at all.
Yeah, this transformation is literally going to prevent him from returning home.
Right.
We'll see. I mean, I still kind of think he's going to come back. for the exact reasons as you just pointed out there. Although I will say, like, one standard of the hero's journey is like there is some sort of crisis that leads him toward like on the adventure, and the power or thing or item he gains changes him, and on his return he's able to like he's changed and then able to overcome. But like what like what's happening in Charlie's world that he needs to overcome, right? Like he seems like at this point he's doing okay, but maybe that's an unfair read, right? Maybe the things you've been saying about the way Charlie has been like not processing his feelings, has been like kind of wrestling with this deep welling of anger that perhaps will eventually explode. I don't know.
If there's a concrete thing, it would have to do with his father.
Yeah, who, as we both know, is gonna die horribly, right?
Either that, or like there's a situation where Charlie needs to use his whatever he's gained or learned here to resolve the situation. Maybe his father still dies. I don't know. I'm kind of reaching here.
Oh, you're kind of starting to hedge the whole his dad's dead thing here. That's interesting.
The idea of this being a hero's journey has actually really thrown me, because ever since you brought up that idea, I'm like, this is absolutely a hero's journey. And if it's a hero's journey, I don't know that it can end the way that I was thinking. But like, I don't know, maybe King will just deviate from the structure. Like he really doesn't write according to structures ever. Like that's just not his thing. So we'll see.
Yeah, no, interesting. I wonder if you want to make some predictions for that, but maybe not. Maybe we'll just see where
I'll think about it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So Charlie, as they kind of run out of the city, and the door closes behind Charlie here, we hear Hannah in the background running towards them and discovering the corpse of her daughter. Oops.
Yeah. And here we humanize Hannah just a little tiny bit.
Yeah, and surely there won't be any moments after this where we completely dehumanize her, right?
Surely
right?
not.
So Charlie looks upon his friends, and he speaks to Leia specifically and says, "Hello, Leia," I said, feeling suddenly shy. "I'm very glad to see you." She turned away from me with no sign that she'd heard. She might have been as deaf as Claudia. Her mouthless face was a stone. Uh-oh.
So at first I interpreted this in a way that confirmed all of my theories. But then I eventually decided that she's just upset at the idea that she's going to have to confront her brother now.
Yeah. I mean, and she knows that Charlie is the method through which this confrontation is going to have to happen.
Right.
Like, yeah. She sees the writing on the wall. She knows, and she's just not ready to accept it. I think 100%. Yep. Yeah, I'm laughing so much imagining you being like, "I knew it," and then it doesn't really go that way. But that's funny. Right. All right, chapter 27, a conference, the snab, no Disney prince and princess, the pact. I love how this chapter starts, man. It's this little mini section that says, "I remember two things with great clarity about our conference. No one mentioned the name Gog Magog, and Leia never looked at me. Not once." The first one's funny because, like, of course they didn't. When you say that name in this world, the whole fucking earth shakes. So yeah, no one's going to bring this guy up. And the second one we've already talked about, but I think it's interesting. I mean, it's interesting to think about, like, those are the two things that stick out most to him about this whole conversation.
Yeah, right. I guess that is an interesting framing for the conversation. Yeah.
I am really curious. Like, we're about to get really into the Leia and Galleon thing, and I know, like, with the idea that Charlie is kind of the entire book, he's been beating himself up and saying that this whole story is going to end poorly, right? Like, this is going to end badly. This is not going to end well. Like, he's telling the story about of great embarrassment about this thing that is awful. So it's like, what is going to happen? Like, and I'm really starting to think, like, if you're right and it's going to be hero's journey to the way that his father is not going to die, like, I feel like something bad's going to happen to Leia here, and that like, I'm using this idea of, like, he's really, like, when he thinks back at this moment, one of the things he thinks back about most is how angry Leia was with him and with what was going to have to be done. And it's like, well, like, I don't know, maybe I'm reaching here, but like, if everything worked out and we defeated Flight Killer and Leia was reestablished as the queen of this land and everything good, like, would he remember her anger at him as clear and as readily as he seems to hear? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't got a lot to say on this. I mean, just because like I kind of had an idea of where things might end up, and now I'm just confused. So,
well, you know, we don't have to know. Like, that's our job is not to correctly predict where this book is going, right?
That's
so we
true.
don't have to stress about it.
That's true. We can just react in the moment. It's good to be reminded of that, because I definitely get roped into thinking like it's gonna happen.
Yeah, the expectation here is that we're amazing our audience with our incredible predictive skills, and that is not it at all.
No, not at all.
All right, so the group meets up in the shed, and Charlie spends the night Charlie spent the night in before. They basically are deciding what to do next. Claudia and Woody want to go back into the city and end the reign of Flight Killer. After all, Charlie is the prince who was promised Adrian Bowditch's heir. This is what we talked about earlier on in the show, where we're like, they seem to know this great prophecy, but never share what it actually is. Like, did the prophecy specifically mention that the heir of Adrian is going to come back? Like, is that really what it said? Is that how specific it was?
Yeah, so like along the lines of what we were talking about earlier with the prince that was promised, and like I was like, I think you should probably never try to fulfill a prophecy that you haven't actually read, because and then the prince that was promised was just horribly mauled to death by Flight Killer, but succeeded in causing a small wound in Flight Killer's side, which Leia was able to exploit to defeat him. And that's the prophecy. And you're like, would have been good to know that. but like, that's another thing I was thinking about when it's like Leia won't look at him. If it's like, well, if Leia knows something about his fate that's bad, then that's another reason why she might have some measure of guilt or other feelings around Charlie.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a good question to ask here, is like, are characters like intentionally vaguely referencing this prophecy because they don't want to reveal the fullness of it? Or is this just kind of like how King does world building sometimes, where he's just going to nebulously reference this prophecy, but we're never going to talk about it because it ultimately doesn't matter. What matters is there is a prophecy, not exactly what the prophecy says.
Yeah, that's a good point.
All right, so they take account of what they've got. Most of the night soldiers have been killed, but there's still Kellen, who we learn is the King's Guard. He was the leader of the King's Guard, and now he's the leader of the enemy. He's Jaime Lannister, Matt. Son of a bitch.
Oh, wow, you're right.
There is also only about 12 night soldiers left, and we know that they're weak to water, but they're still there, and also there's still Hannah. Still probably too much for a frontal assault. They need to take out Flight Killer, but like, when and how? Well, Matt, we don't have to worry about the win, though, because while it's true that Flight Killer is dangerous and might repoison the world, he can only do that when the moons kiss. And who knows when that's going to happen? Tomorrow. It's going to happen tomorrow. Fuck.
Well, of course it is.
This is great fairy tale logic here, right?
That was my thought.
Yeah. So they decide they must go and stop Eldon, but Leia isn't too happy about this, Matt. She still loves her brother and is convinced that he couldn't have become this person that everyone says he is. Like, something else must be going on here. And we get a brief history lesson, Matt, about Eldon and Flight Killer and about Leia. And I want to read this part, and I want to talk about evil a little bit here with you. There was no need for it. Robert was as fair a face as Eldon was ugly. He was petted and cosseted by his parents, while Eldon was largely ignored by them, and Robert had no cause for jealousy on account of the throne, since he was the older and bound to take it when Jan died or stepped down. He just hated and loathed his younger brother. I think... He paused, frowning. I think there's always a reason for love, but sometimes hate just is, a kind of free-floating evil. I didn't reply, but thought of my two Rumpelstiltskins, Christopher Polly and Peterkin. Why had the dwarf gone to all the trouble of erasing the trail of initials, and would have taken me out of the city long before dark? Why had he risked his life and lost it to the point to point me out to Red Molly? Because I'd crossed him in the matter of the red cricket? Because I was tall and he was short? I didn't believe that for a minute. He'd done it because he could, and because he wanted to cause trouble. So, Matt, this is where I wanted to talk to you about King's concept of evil. And, one of the things we've said throughout the course of this whole project is there is mundane evil and there's cosmic evil, right? There are these big things that represent like evil in its pure form, but most of that stuff acts through people who are just people. And King is really interested in exploring the idea of what makes a person become bad. And the thing that I find so interesting about this is King has set up this thing where like there are reasons for it, right? There's reasons for why Eldon would hate these people. There's reasons for why people would not like Eldon. There's reasons behind all of it. But then he concludes it with this idea of like, yeah, well, I mean, sometimes people just are evil, and that's it. They're just, some people are just bad. And I do think that's a slight complication of this kind of cosmic concept he's had throughout so much of his career. What do you think?
I agree. It's very unusual. I honestly still not sure what to make of it and what we're doing with all this, because it is pretty dramatically different from the way he usually treats evil. This idea, it's like there's the language free-floating evil just sort of gestures at this idea that there's just like an ontologically fundamental evil that is floating out there that just can swoop in and get you. And that's typically not how evil works in his stories. I mean, even the Crimson King, which is like the pinnacle of cosmic evil, doesn't quite operate that way. Like he can only kind of get in if you invite him to abuse the vampire metaphor. So I don't know what to make of this, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, so I have a theory here, and I think we need to wait for the end of the book to really declare whether this is true or not. But like, I go back to like trying to set the time that this book was written in, right? This is in the middle of the pandemic when King is writing this story. It's also like in the world that exists in the past couple of decades. And also the last 8 years or so, we know King is very interested in politics. We know King has very specific ideas, and something we talked about a couple of books ago is this idea that I have that really King's exploration in every single one of his books is just trying to understand why the world is the way it is, why good people suffer, why bad people exist, why they do the things they do. Like, everything he looks at, everything he does is shining a spotlight on some of the worst behaviors of people to desperately try to understand why we are this way. And there's part of me that looks at what's happening in this book and what he's saying in this book in the middle of this global pandemic, trapped in a house, like this kind of collective trauma we all had, and reaching a conclusion that is just, oh, sometimes people just suck, actually. And like, I don't love that because I don't want that to be the case. I don't want him to like take a life's work of analysis and simplify it to, oh, some people are just bad. And that's like the great answer to the question of my career is sometimes people just suck, actually. But I can't help but feel that here. I don't know. Maybe I'm off base.
No, I that's kind of how I can't square it. Is it doesn't really quite square with my previously existing understanding of his conception of the nature of evil. Like it typically, though maybe not always, but typically there's a kind of like the evil in the story will be driven by a character who is weak or fearful, and they're acting out of what they think is necessary self-preservation.
Yeah.
That's one very common kind. I mean, every once in a while you'll get one who is just sort of broken in their mind, either due to something that happened to them or just like an accident of birth, and they're just fucked in the head, to sort of put it grossly. But like that's a character type for sure.
Yeah.
But even them, like that this isn't that thing though. This is this feels different from that.
Yeah, I mean, I really kind of hope we get an opportunity to like talk with Eldon, or whatever's left of Eldon, possibly. Like, I really hope we get some greater understanding. Because let's be clear here: this paragraph I just read is not talking about Eldon, right? Like, it's talking about his brother Robert, who was just seemingly just an asshole to be an asshole, and that's it. So we're not talking about Eldon here, but I am really curious about like what we're gonna ultimately say with like the choices Eldon made, and the truth of when he opened this deep well, and how much of what he's doing is this eldritch evil Gog Magog, and how much of it is him and his own choices. And I think like I think certainly we could get around to at the end of this story just being like, oh, this fits perfectly with King's understanding of evil in his world. Like we've gone back to it. But yeah, right now I was also left scratching my head and going like, huh, interesting. I think we're maybe doing something a little bit different here.
This feels like a stretch, but the older brother kind of seems like Joffrey Baratheon.
Okay.
And just in terms of like, there's no reason why Joffrey is the way he is.
Yeah.
I mean, you could say the reason is that he's always just had way too much power and privilege.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, but there's a lot of people in that world who are given a lot of power and privilege, and they don't all turn out as badly as Joffrey.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I really grabbed onto here is like the Peterkin comparison, because like I think it's really interesting that he says like, oh, why did Peterkin do this? Why was he so bad? Why did he fuck me up? Was it just simply because I messed with him? And he just concludes no. But like that is a reason, right? Like you could absolutely say like you pissed off Peterkin and he decided to fuck up your day, and wasn't going to let this grudge go. Like that certainly could be a reason. But I do think it's interesting that Charlie just immediately dismisses that. It's like, no. He just did it because he could, and that's it.
Yeah, I agree that's interesting.
Yeah. All right. Regardless, we realized that Leia and Eldon bonded on their kind of mutual dislike for their siblings and their siblings' mutual dislike for them. They go on adventures. They explore the palace together. They also have this really close bond with this beautiful mermaid, Elsa. They really both loved her. Oh no.
Uh-huh.
Oh no. Oh no. And then Matt, we briefly talk about the snab, and you and I have already talked about the snab. But anything else you wanted to say about the snab? I think we kind of covered it already, but
it's just a really nice, silly, charming fairy tale kind of word.
I really spent some time looking up if there was any specific like fairy tale concept around a cricket named Snab. Like I know we talked about this when we first saw the red cricket, and we were like, oh yeah, like the cricket from Pinocchio. But like there's nothing I could find that has anything like fairy tale-ish with the word snab. Like apparently it comes from a Swedish word named snab with two B's that means fast or quick. Or there's also a Scottish word named called snab, which is the brow of a steep rise. So like, I don't know, man. You got anything here?
I know two Scottish words. One of them is snab, which means the brow of a steep rise, and one of them is Craig, which means the brow of a steep rise. So,
okay, so maybe Scottish is just constantly talking about the brows of steep rises.
Scott. It's a very craggy land. It's a very rocky, craggy type situation.
It's like the Inuits have like 700 different words for snow. The Scottish,
right.
It's just all about.
And I'm sure they would correct me and say that a crag and a snab are two totally different things, and it's absurd that I would get them confused.
They probably will. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we have any Scottish listeners out there? Please correct us.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I couldn't find anything. It like when you search for the snab, when you search for snab fairy tale, hey, turns out you get people talking about the snab from fairy tale, and that's all I could find.
Okay.
Seems like a popular character, though. People are really into this cricket.
Good.
Good. I'm glad. It's a lot of artwork about a red cricket.
Huh.
All right. So I did want to talk about this briefly. So they're talking about the moon, and I think it's we get a little bit of understanding of what's going on with these twin moons. And it says, in the old days, it was told by men of wisdom that someday they'll actually collide, Woody said, and both will be smashed to bits. They might not even need to collide for them to be destroyed. Their mutual attraction might pull them to pieces, as sometimes happens in human lives. Okay, two things here. One, these moons are definitely crashing into each other before the end of this book, right? Like 100%, right? Like,
maybe.
Are you with me on this one?
Not necessarily.
Oh, come on, man. Come on.
No, I think the king just learned about the Rocher limit and title shredding and wanted to have that in his book.
Okay. We'll see. Number two, can we relate this last concept specifically to anything like character or theme wise in this book? Like their mutual attraction might pull them to pieces, as sometimes happens in human lives. Like, what do you think?
No, I can't think of any possible metaphorical. Yes. So
sarcastic, and I don't like it.
I mean, so one way is like you get the two worlds of our world and Impus being the two worlds, and they're two worlds that you could sort of metaphorically say that they orbit each other.
Sure,
and maybe if they get too close to each other, they will shred each other apart.
Yeah, that is true. We get a little implication here that if Gog Magog is released again, he could not just fuck up this world, but perhaps all the worlds beyond it. That's true.
Yeah. And then, I mean, I don't know. Like, I guess I can't think of a specific character pairing where I'm like, those two, yeah, they're clearly the two characters who will ruin each other if they get too close. Do you have a idea here?
The only characters I could come up with here are Leia and Eldon, right? These two characters, like really the only two characters in the story that are just like incredibly close with each other, have this incredibly meaningful and important relationship that ultimately might be destructive. That like Leia needs to realize that perhaps that this guy is just gone, and the brother that she loved doesn't exist anymore, and being around him could be incredibly destructive, because we have been told, right, that like as they go into the castle in the next chapter, there's incredible power in Flight Killer and Gog Magog, whatever, but there's also incredible power still left in the name and the power of the Galleon family. So perhaps these two people being in proximity to each other near this font of power could be not good.
Good point.
We'll see. We will see. All right, so here we go. Tomorrow we go into the city and retake it while the night soldiers are at their weakest. Leia will lead us, as is her right, but you must find Eldon and slay him before he can open the well. It should be Leia. She is the rightful heir to the throne, as such it should be her task, her burden. But, so is this the prophecy, Matt? Now we're robbing the rightful heir from getting to do heir work here?
I don't know. I'm worried.
I also want to talk about the time where Woody says the thing, Matt. He says the thing. He says, there are other worlds than these, Charlie. Matt, he says it.
You know, Scott, just once I want the other character in the scene to be like, nah, I don't think so. Well, like, what if they're just these ones?
Just these two?
Yeah.
It's just these two.
Like, what if there's just the ones we know about? Like, how do you know there's other ones? Maybe there's just two. You don't know.
I don't know, Matt. How did Jake know? Just some kid falling down to his death just knew about other worlds?
How did he know?
Bullshit.
It's bullshit is what it is.
This book sucks.
Yeah.
Okay. So as I wanted to talk to you about this part here. I think this is really important. I think that's when the coldness started to come over me. The one I remembered from my worst of my outings with Bertie Bird, and from Polly when I'd broken first one of his hands, then the other, and from Claw. I had thrown the drumstick and at him and said, "I'm gonna fuck you up, honey," which I did, and without regret. I was no Disney prince, and maybe that was good. A Disney prince wasn't what the people of Empus needed. So again, Matt, I think this is perhaps a rehash of our earlier conversation, but I did want to ask you this question here and now. is Charlie right? Right. I mean, like, I think this is an important part of, like, he's made the decision. He's decided that the dark side of me, the birdie bird side of me, the wrist breaking, drumstick throwing side of me is the side of me that this world needs. And he's even got reinforcement of that, right? It's led him to success so far in this world. But is he right?
I kind of want to say no, like, or he's missing something. We said this kind of earlier, but like the thing about Charlie, the remarkable, unique, lovable thing about Charlie is his conscientious, good-hearted kid. It's a kid who does feel guilt when he does bad things. A kid who is capable of remorse and regret. Like if Ka chose him, that was surely part of the reason. It's not just like there's plenty of thugs who have the steel to do hard things when hard things are necessary. Like that's not hard to find in the world. It's the core of goodness and morality that's unique about him. So I think we're setting up this idea that like the struggle for Charlie's soul, the struggle within himself, the climax of the story, the emotional heart of the story is Charlie going to realize this? Is he going to embrace this side of himself? And you know, that's kind of his apotheosis, right? The apotheosis is part of the hero's journey. The apotheosis is like, are you gonna become your higher self, or not? Right? I think that's what we're doing.
Yeah, I think I like that. And I think perhaps we could best say it as this idea that like he's decided that what the world needs is the darkest version of himself, and while it's true that like it needs a little bit of that, it's like he's perhaps going too far and embracing that at the expense of the things that make him essentially him, which are his innate goodness,
right,
and qualities. And perhaps it's a mixture of these two things, because it's goodness in the way of Empus. Like all the qualities on the side of that trolley are things that Charlie has shown throughout the course of this book, right? These are not like, you know, lofty goals to reach. This is like who he is. And it seems like that's important, and we don't want to lose that, but there's this other side of him too. Yeah. We'll see.
Yep.
It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. All right. So the two royals go to bed and Charlie goes outside chatting with Iota, who is, by the way, we haven't mentioned this, but like he was sitting in there listening to this entire conversation about how Charlie comes from this other world, and he's like losing his fucking mind about this guy. He's like, wait a minute, you come from another world? Who are you? I love the whole thing so much.
It's awesome. I agree.
So Charlie, whose eyes are now fully blue, decides to wait outside. Iota, Jaya, and Eris join him, and we're not sure what Charlie is waiting for at first, but it turns out it is Leia, who, as Charlie predicted, has decided to go into Lilimar by herself to find her brother. The group, Charlie's Tet, follow her, including Radar. She won't be parted from her master again, it seems. And Steven? Don't you do it. Don't you do it. And our cricket friend joins us as well, right?
Yep.
He ends up like being, the cricket ends up playing an important role in like being Leia's translator for us. Like that instead of the horse, we do the cricket. But then the cricket disappears when they get inside Lilimar, which feels like it was mentioned explicitly for a reason, right? It's like, where did the cricket go? Oh, I guess it didn't like the rain. It's like, yeah, sure, that's all right. That we're doing with that.
Yeah, no, the cricket's going to definitely come back. He's going to be Charlie's conscience. Or, I mean, he may literally remind Charlie of like conscience like that. Look, I'm no longer joking. Like clearly the idea of Charlie and his conscience is a key part of the story. It's the heart of his character.
Yes.
And the idea that there's a cricket and that the cricket's super important. It's like, yeah, that's what we're doing.
Yep.
Clearly.
Yep. I think you're totally right there for sure. All right, so Charlie walks up to Leia and says to her, "Who keeps your geese, my lady, while you are away?" Not what I expected to say, and not the way Charlie Reed of Century, Illinois would have said anything. Her eyes widened, then crinkled a bit at the corners. With no mouth, it was hard to be sure, but I think she was amused as well as surprised. Falada said, "My mistress's man, Wit and Dickon, keep them very well." As in Dick Whittington, I thought. Hey, Matt, how much do you know about Dick Whittington?
Nothing.
I mean, me neither, but I have Google, so I researched. This is a English folktale titled Dick Whittington and His Cat. It is a made-up story about one of the mayors of London back in the 1300s. A man named Richard Whittington who was a rich merchant that was eventually appointed mayor of London. The actual folktale itself is just about how Dick Whittington is a poor orphan boy that has a cat, and then enters a rat-ridden area and uses his cat to defeat all the rats, and then becomes rich because of it. So there's nothing really to make of this here, except like, holy shit, has Charlie read everything? What does a 17-year-old kid from Illinois know about a British folktale?
Well, this is clearly the true reason why Charlie was chosen, because of his encyclopedic knowledge of all books.
20 chapters ago, he was like, "How does Jack and the Beanstalk end again?" And now he's like, "Ah, yes, Dick Whittington and his cat."
Maybe he didn't know all this before, and it's been beamed into his brain due to being an impus.
I mean, maybe you're right.
I mean, I don't actually think so. But
after softening her up, Charlie confronts Leia, not as Charlie, but as Prince Charlie, and Leia speaks to him through the snab. She says she believes her brother is either dead or imprisoned, and she will either avenge or free him. Charlie needs Leia. She's the only one who knows how to get to the deep well that the Flight Killer is currently heading to. So he negotiates, promising to leave the final fate of Flight Killer up to her on his mother's soul. Pretty important moment here, right?
Yes, I agree.
I will say, though, pretty easy to make this pledge and this promise when immediately after that you think in your head, I mean, I can just like hand my gun to Iota and he can shoot him, so I won't break my promise.
Yeah. That's why it has to be Charlie's going to have like a spiritual choice to make, right? It's not going to be it's not going to be the gun that solves the problem, right?
I certainly hope not. Yeah. I think you're right on that. This is going to be a moral decision at the center of this whole thing. And I don't know how it's going to play out, but I'm pretty excited about it.
Me too.
All right, Matt, our final chapter of the week, chapter 28, Into the City, the Sound of Morning. Hannah, she who once sang Gold, the kitchen, the receiving chamber, we must go up to go down. I think that gives you a pretty big preview of like how much happens in this one chapter. It's not even a long chapter. It's like 15 pages long. There's just a lot here. We're moving pretty quick now.
Yeah, totally.
And I just want to say I really, really like this chapter a whole lot. Like, I do think, looking back on it, that as much as I enjoyed like the prison arc, I do think the book like lost a little bit of a beat during that section of the novel. I'm not totally convinced that it did, but I can kind of see why people would say that. I do think like this chapter, as we sprint towards the climax, like I'm just into this stuff. How did you feel about this one?
Yeah, like I was worried that we would lose the thread of what I felt like we were doing with Charlie, because it felt like we were kind of losing track of that, and now I'm less worried about that. And yeah, it's picked up its momentum again. I'm very invested still. I'm very invested in what's going on and how things are going to wrap up. So yeah, still enjoying it.
So having made the pact with Leia, the group waits for first light and then makes their way into the city itself. Not through the front gate this time, but through a hidden side door that only Leia knew about. They make their way into the trolley storage area and then eventually out into the city. And we get this. Radar suddenly bolted down the trolley house steps and past one of the red and white posts with its stone butterfly on top. She nosed into the brambles. I saw one strap of my discarded backpack, then heard the last thing I would have expected, but once I recognized at once. Radar came trotting back with her squeaky monkey. She dropped it at my feet and looked up at me, wagging her tail. And I swear to fucking God, Steven, don't you do this.
He's making me so nervous.
I can't tell you how many, like, I have like in my mind, like chastised people in the past about seeing like saying like, I got so nervous I just had to look up if someone died at the end of this book. And like, why would you ruin it for yourself by doing that? But I have never been more close to just like opening Google right now and just being like, tell me that Radar is going to be okay. Just tell me.
Yeah. I haven't done it, but I feel you.
Everyone else in this book can die. Literally everyone. This dog better make it out alive. That's all I'm saying.
It is interesting because sometimes I will get so distracted by a question like that it just ruins a book for me.
Mm-hmm.
Usually not with King, but it has happened.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of threatened to like completely overpower. Like you're so focused on your fear for a character, or in this case, a dog, that like you stop paying attention to everything else the book is doing.
I don't care what else happens. I only care about this one thing. And like, well, that's clearly not how you're supposed to be processing the book. And thus it's kind of, you don't appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I need to talk about this with you briefly here as well, Matt. Leia had stopped at the foot of the steps, head cocked, listening. We joined her. I could hear it too, a kind of high moaning, like wind gusting around the eaves on a winter night. It rose and fell, climbed to a shriek, then subsided to a moaning again. High gods, what is it? Jaya whispered. The sound of mourning, I said. So, Matt, your predictions about Hannah didn't turn out to be exactly true, right? She's not royalty. She's not a galleon. But as you said, with her discovery of her dead child, we are humanizing our giant monster a bit here, right? Like this woman is now in the throes of mourning after losing her child, crying, wailing, and we sympathize with her a little bit. And then we immediately make clear she's a cannibal who got kicked out of her country for eating people. And is now serving the dark evil guy and needs to be killed for the good of the land. So we're going to go do that right now. So it's like, what? Huh? How? This is the emotional whiplash.
Yeah. I don't have a lot of smart things to say about this. Just continue to be confused about the statement we're making about the nature of evil. Like, yeah, she's a monster, like both physically, but also through her actions. But she does love her daughter. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't really, that's not mitigating. So, and she's just evil. She's just an evil monster and we got to kill her.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think, the first time we discovered Hannah was the time where you and I kind of had this great big conversation about like, what are we doing with like beauty versus ugliness? Like, are we really just going to create this situation where like, if things are beautiful and pure, they are good. If things are ugly and gross and damaged and deformed, they are bad. Is that really what we're doing? And we said at the time, it was like, I just don't feel like Stephen King in the year 2021 would do something like that. And like, we were kind of right about that, right? Like, there's definitely something we're doing here with the cruel older brother, and how they picked on Eldon, who is this deformed, like clubbed-footed, unattractive boy, and they were just being mean to him for those very reasons. And the book is clearly pointing out how those things are wrong, right? However, at the same time, we have Leia, who is this beautiful, perfect fairy tale princess who is herself teased and ridiculed by her siblings for being this beautiful, perfect fairy tale princess. We have this beautiful, perfect fairy tale mermaid who was killed for her beauty, and this ugly, gross, deformed giant who is just bad. So, like, it's kind of what we said, but it's kind of not.
Yeah. It's playing in the space of what we said, but it's not what we said.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what it is saying.
I don't know. Yeah. Maybe we'll find out next week.
Yeah.
All right. So I just want to say I love this moment so much. So they're standing by Hannah's house. Hannah is sitting on her throne crying, and they get there and it says, Leia pointed to her, then raised her hands to me, palms out. What next? This, I thought, and began walking across the square towards where Hannah sat. One hand was on the butt of Mr. Bowditch's gun. I didn't realize Radar was with me until she began to bark. Then they came full-throated from her deep chest, with a snarl each time she drew breath. Hannah looked up and saw us coming. What a fucking badass moment. Like, we talked about the Red Molly kill as David versus Goliath, but like, this is just that exactly, right?
Yeah.
And then Charlie pulls out his gun and fucking David's her right in the face with a 45. I think this moment is great. This is a wonderful distillation of this non-Disney prince idea, standing up and taking care of business. But I don't know. There was something about this that felt weird to me. And when I thought about it for a while, it was really interesting that like King basically repeats himself here. Like this, like we have two giants, one like a half giant, one a full giant. Charlie walks up to the giant, empties a clip of bullets into the giant. The giant falls over. Hooray, we win. Charlie has a gun. Charlie fires. Charlie wins, right? Like, this is just, in both cases, that is exactly what happens. And this is kind of supposed to be anticlimactic here, but it feels weird that they're both anticlimactic in the exact same way.
Yeah, this one's almost more anticlimactic because it's almost like Hannah, who's a much bigger and scarier monster, just kind of dissolves.
Yeah.
I mean, not that it's surprising that a 45 would do that too, but like it's almost like she just bursts like rotten fruit. She's like already ready to die, like because she's so like diseased, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that was an explicit implication, but I got the sense that like she's kind of so messed up that as soon as he started shooting at her, she just kind of fell apart.
Yeah.
Which made her seem even more pitiful to me, actually.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is that he's using a much higher caliber of a gun than he did on the little pea shooter 22 he did on Red Molly, but like it's also a much bigger monster. And
right.
Yeah, like he even says with that gun with Red Molly that like the gun isn't what killed her teeth was what killed her. And here, yeah, he just explodes Hannah's face essentially.
Right.
So we see here that Eris goes up to the body and pees on it. And we learn that apparently Hannah had entirely devastated her village. Once again, going through our thing of like, what are we saying? What are we saying with ugly evilness? What are we saying with this? So confused. But then Leia chops off her fucking head and has Iota chuck into the fountain. So there we go. We're done with Hannah. Let's move on.
All right.
So Charlie leads on, revealing that the real reason he wanted to go this way through Hannah was not just taking out Hannah, but he wanted to bring Leia to see Elsa, to see what was done with her, what her brother did to her. And we get this. Because she was beautiful, and the force that governs him hates all beauty, the monarchs, good people like Dora, who were once whole people, the very land you are meant to rule over. What he loves is violence and pain and murder. He loves Grey. When we find him, if we find him, will you kill him if I should fall? So again, this, I know we talked about this, but I just wanted to harp on this again. Like, this complicates what we're doing and the nature of evil and everything we've said. I don't know. What do you think? We're just rehashing what we've already talked about a little here, but is there anything else you wanted to add?
Just like, again, like this is just not how King normally talks about evil. Like again, like normally it's evil's a consequence of people acting out of like low instincts or like understandable motivations, but in a way that's human. Evil isn't usually just like evil. Like it's not Emperor Palpatine cackling evil. Even the Crimson King, who is the closest thing to Emperor Palpatine cackling evil, he doesn't hate. To paraphrase what you said here, he loves Grey. He loves violence and pain and murder. It's like he's just evil. He just loves evil. He just loves being evil. He's Emperor Palpatine. I'm not, by the way, it maybe sounds like I'm complaining or saying this is bad. It's really just confusing. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, because it's a fairy tale. Good.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear here, like I think it is fine and certainly Kingian for like Gog Magog, for example, to just be this embodiment of evil. Like, this is the thing he does, right? He has these embodiments of evil, like cosmic evil in the Lovecraftian sense. But he also has like people, and that evil usually manipulates those people, and we have that here. But like, I guess maybe what I'm pushing back against is this idea of Eldon just being this avatar of pure evil. Again, we need to see like what happened the first time he went down into the deep well. Like how much Eldon is still in there? How much is he in control of his faculties and his choices and his decisions at this point? Or is this just the old? I mean, this could just be the very old King story of a hurt person lets in the bad, lets in the primeval, and through their own weaknesses lets this thing control him in a similar way to people let Pennywise in it, right? I don't know.
Yeah. It's funny, as you were talking, I was kind of thinking about Pennywise as like a counterexample to what I had just said. Because Pennywise like feeds off of fear and negative basically just negative emotions.
I mean, and even the Crimson King, I think, is a kind of an embodiment of that kind of cosmic, like just bad to the bone type people. But like so much of the actual antagonists of these stories are not necessarily the Crimson King or Pennywise. It's the things that are empowered by that evil or let that evil in. Like that's what we have here. Like what we need to see. Like if it turns out it's just the conclusion is Eldon is just that same level of evil at the end, it's going to be like, huh, okay, interesting.
Yeah. I've never quite thought about it this way, because like even Pennywise actually wants to just live in its hole and feed off of pain. The Crimson King doesn't want that. The Crimson King wants to drag everything in the universe down into wanton chaos.
Yeah, it's the opposite of order is what the Crimson King wants. Yeah,
basically chaos and nihilism, and those two things are two different flavors of cosmic evil.
Yeah,
and this is kind of a third one that I don't, we don't really know much about Gog Magog, but it feels different because it seems distinct to me that it's like he wants the world to be gray and full of murder and violence. We just don't know that much about what this entity is, I guess. So
do you think we'll learn? I mean, I think, like, do you think there's gonna be like exposition about what Gog Magog is? Because I'm kind of leaning towards no. I think it's just gonna be this kind of unknowable Lovecraftian evil thing that the story will end with us shutting the door between his world and Empus, and that'll be it.
Yeah, I don't anticipate a real info dump, but I wouldn't be surprised if we learn a bit more when we kind of have our confrontation with Flight Killer. But
okay, yeah, I think we'll at least see like how those two got together. Those two crazy kids first got together. So
right,
yeah. All right, so they head into the building, and at the end of the pinwheel path into a large lobby. I really like this line. I thought of ISIS zealots destroying the cultural artifacts of civilization that had gone before them, as he looks at the damage that's been wrought in this beautiful lobby. And like, once again, speaking of what was going on in the world at the time and what King is writing about here, I thought a lot about like how much is Empus King looking at our world and flawed, sure, but like this beautiful idea of a thing that once was and has kind of fallen. I think there's something there to like that. Like we see Empus as not a different world, but as just a reflection of Earth in our world.
That is interesting. The mention of ISIS here is interesting, and the idea that maybe this is also something King was thinking about at that period of time.
Yeah.
Is pretty interesting, because like I've never thought of myself as a particularly like naive or Pollyannish person. Like I thought I had an appreciation for the level of darkness in the human soul, and then when ISIS came along, I was like, no, that can't really be, like, they can't really be that cartoonishly evil. like they're just evil. Like they're evil in the exact caricatured way that we're sort of saying in context of this conversation is just implausible.
Yeah.
Like that's ISIS. That's
I
the
mean,
actual ISIS.
that's like
Um,
maybe this is exactly why King has kind of updated his understanding of these things, right?
yeah,
He's having the same reaction that you're having,
yeah,
and yes, sadly, not just ISIS. Like there's plenty of things and people and groups out here that are doing this kind of stuff to people all the time. Like it must look, when you look at these things, when you look at these people and look at these actions, it must look like this idea of, oh, you
good.
just hate goodness. Yeah, like you
Yeah,
love
yeah.
gray. You love violence, pain, murder. You love gray. You hate goodness. Like,
Hmm.
yeah, it must feel that way.
That's what I mean. That's what learning about ISIS felt like to me. I was like, oh, that. So I was just wrong in my attempt to think that evil was like complicated and just like intellectualized. It's like, oh no, it's a thing that's right there. That's what it is.
Yeah.
I can now point at it. Thank you for providing that.
Yeah, no, that's
Um,
certainly true. Yeah. Jesus.
so
Awful, awful, awful stuff. Yeah.
yeah, I honestly, when I was reading and he mentioned ISIS, I kind of like something kind of clicked in my head, and it feels like now I finally articulated, like, yeah, that was the thing that was happening when he was writing the book, or shortly beforehand, anyway.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
All right, so it turns out that the lobby that they're in is basically the kind of central area of the stadium, and we see here that to show off the wealth of the city and of Empus in general, there is this glass wall into the vault of Lilimar, which is absolutely overflowing with beads of gold, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of beads of gold. Matt, it's Scrooge McDuck's swimming vault. We found it here, and I know you said, Matt, that you can't swim in coins, that if you jumped into a big vault of coins, it would be like jumping into solid ground and you'd break all the bones in your body. But they're not coins, Matt. They're beads. So you
Yeah.
can do that, right? Right?
It's beads are basically a fluid.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm a scientist.
I look at there. We have a PhD, a doctor,
Mm-hmm.
saying you can do it. So listen up, kids. Go jump into a big pool of beads and say Matt said I could do it.
Do not do that. Thank you.
All right, so from here, the group heads into the kitchen where we learn this is where the food that was prepared for the prisoners was cooked. Charlie asks the cook what happened to Percy, and we learn that, as Charlie suspected, the guards knew he was involved in the escape and took him away, probably to torture him. He maybe is still alive, but maybe not. We know they're in a hurry, but Charlie at this point basically decides they're going to have to do a little side trip. He's got a little payback to do. So I for one can't wait to see him horribly murder Kellen. I can't wait.
Yes, I agree. That's going to be very satisfying.
Charlie walks up some locked doors and speaks the words of Leia of Galleon, and the doors just like crash open. Like we hear the lock on the other side break. I love this line. Should have tried that in Malene, Eris said. You could have saved us a lot of grief. I could have said I'd never thought of it, which was true, but that wasn't all of it. I wasn't the prince then. I was still what? Jai asked. Still changing, I thought. Deep Malene was my cocoon. So we'd already talked about that a little bit. I just love, like, comically the idea of, like, if he had just said, open in the name of of the Galleon to the doors of his prison, they would have just possibly opened, because this whole place is just infused with magic.
Yeah, it is a very funny thought, but I actually think he's right. Like,
yeah.
No,
that wouldn't have worked, I think. And we already talked about the crossing of the threshold, and this is definitely him reborn as this person. Yeah.
Right.
Eventually, the group makes it to the receiving room, the throne room, where the king and queen would speak to the people. A massive room with balconies and chairs and 2 thrones right in the center. And the room, Matt, has been defouled. It's kind of like, I think King does a really good job here of making you feel like, obviously this wasn't a perfect place, right? They had their problems. The monarchy was not these perfect angels. The city was not this perfect fairy tale world where no one suffered. There was no poverty. It wasn't that, but there is something about this that just kind of breaks your heart a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I found it upsetting. Found it kind of horrible, actually. Yeah.
Just like they just came into this room, this symbol of all the magic and power of this family, and they just pooped in it.
Yeah.
awful.
It's dark.
It is dark. It is very dark. But our chapter ends with them going to the room beyond the throne room. They step into what looks like a giant cathedral with 3 spires at the top of it. There's a central platform with a wheel next to it that Iota is requested to crank. They all take turns cranking it, and it's very clear here that this is a platform that will rise up into one of the central spires of this room. But hey, wait a minute. They got to go down, not up. And our chapter ends with Leia telling Charlie, "We must go up to go down. Trust me." And the last sentence is, "What choice?" So what do you think? Why must we go up to go down? And is that a metaphor for something?
Yes.
Okay. Well, there we go. We did it, folks. It's a metaphor. That's all you need to know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if this is literally true. Like, are they going to go up and then there's going to be a tube that goes down once they've gone up? Like, I literally don't know.
There may be some kind of weird, like magical, like you go far enough up and then the world flips or does some weird shit and you end up in this secret magic well area.
That's a fun idea. Yeah, metaphorically, I like the idea of you have to find your higher self before you can indulge your dark well, your own. I mean,
it does kind of fit what we've been talking about with Charlie, right?
Yeah,
I think it does. So yeah, I think you're
exactly
something there for sure. All right, well, that is it, Matt. That is the end of chapter 28 and the end of this week's reading. We did it. Your voice made it this far. Folks, we are not going to do our discussion question this week, not only because it's been 2 weeks and I don't even remember what the discussion question was from 2 weeks ago, but also because Matt's voice is doing its best, but we're going to give it a little bit of a break here.
It is teetering.
So yeah, no discussion question. Thank you everyone for sending those in, though. I did still read them and enjoyed your answers to the question that was prisons, I think. Man, 2 weeks is such a long time, Matt. How am I supposed to remember this stuff?
It's forever.
All right, but we still are going to have a question next week. Next week will be our conclusion of the book. We're going to read all the way through the end of the novel, and we will have one last, oh my gosh, Matt, the final discussion question.
Wow.
Maybe we should have picked a better one.
No, this is a pretty good one, actually.
Yeah, I think so too. What is our discussion question for next week?
What's your favorite Deus Ex Machina or your favorite Eucatastrophe?
There's a not zero chance that we've asked this one already.
Oh yeah.
I don't care. I'm done caring about that kind of thing. We're near the end. Just share these. Man, look up what Tolkien's writing on Eucatastrophe. I think you folks will really like his point of view on this thing.
I agree.
And answer that question for the last time. Oh my God. All right, folks. That is it for us here this week. Once again, thank you for the patience, for waiting an extra week for us. We're back now, and we're going straight through to the end now. No more interruptions, no more stops. Matt, you're not allowed to get sick anymore, and we're not allowed to have a life outside of this podcast for the next 3 weeks.
Sounds good.
All right.
If you remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or over on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And the best place to answer that discussion question for the last time, not going to have to remind you again, is reddit.com/r/doofmedia.
Also, get some merch for the last time. Not the last time. The merch will be there for into perpetuity, but you can head on over to doofmedia.myshopify.com and find merchandise for Kingslingers, for our other shows on the Doof Network, and for one day, hopefully soon, for some artwork for and merchandise for Flanagan's Wake, our show that's going to be starting up as we wrap up Kingslingers. Lots of exciting stuff happening on that one, including some news this week that just added a whole new extra thing we're going to have to do on that show, Matt. We're going to have to read Carrie and cover Carrie on Flanagan's Wake. So more King. I'm excited.
Yeah. Just in case people were worried that we were ending Kingslingers, obviously we're just changing the name. Anyway,
yes.
If
by
you
the end of his life, Mike Flanagan will have adapted every single Stephen King novel, and we will have been forced to cover them all.
Yeah. Anyway, if you like Kingslingers / Flanagan's Wake, you want to support us, please consider donating to Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. We're a little bit late this month with our bonus podcast discussion of the TV show Castle Talk. The TV show is Castle Rock. The podcast is Castle Talk because I have been sick, but we're going to catch up and have that out to you as soon as we can.
Yeah, I believe that episode will be out next Wednesday, which is still technically in October, and therefore we have kept our obligation to you, so you're not allowed to get mad at us. That's how that works, right?
That is how that works.
No, I'm pretty sure that will be out on Wednesday. We've both watched the episodes, and we just need to find time to sit down and record it, where one of us has a working voice.
Yeah, right.
I'm glad we live in different cities, so like you can't get me sick or vice versa, because that would be absolutely catastrophic.
That would be
if we had this recording session in person, and then you got me sick, and then oh man,
silver linings.
If you cannot afford to join our Patreon right now, we totally understand. We get it, folks. There are still tons of ways to help us out. You can continue to share the podcast. This podcast is going to be around forever, right? Like we are almost at the end of the show, but this feed is going to be there. Our coverage of the Dark Tower is going to be there. And if your friends are reading the Dark Tower for the first time and want some companions for their journey, I think we'd make pretty good companions. So why don't you let them know about our podcast, which will be there forever. So just keep looping us. Just keep looping us. There's no end to it.
Yeah, exactly.
You can also help us out by leaving rating and reviews for this podcast. This week's Spotlight review comes from Fat Shadow, who says, loving this podcast so far. They give us 5 stars and say, I'm reading the shining parts, and so far you've mentioned a couple books you won't be covering in the pod, including Rose Matter and Dr. Sleep. And I'm wondering why. I was so sad when I heard you won't be covering Dr. Sleep. I understand time being a factor. I'm just wondering why you won't be covering certain books. Well, as we just spoke about, we will, because Flanagan's can do them all. I mean, Dr. Sleep in particular will be covered, right? We're doing that now because there's a excellent movie by Mike Flanagan that we need to talk about, and we need to read the book to be able to talk about that. So, I mean, I guess the real answer to this question is because the man's written 80 novels, and we would die before we covered them all. But also, we just don't want to.
Yeah, and I don't think you really want to hear us like kind of start repeating ourselves.
We already do that so much.
Yeah. I think there's a lifetime to this format of show on a particular author where at a certain point, I don't know what else to say. So
yeah, definitely. But we thank you so much for the kind words. It is in my mind and in my heart like a good thing that people are sad that the show is ending, because it means a lot to you guys. And I will once again reiterate, because we see this comment anywhere, the show is ending. Matt and I are not ending. We are not walking to the clearing at the end of the path. We are just moving to a different path that's in the same forest and sometimes crisscrosses with the previous path. Lots of times, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, folks. I had a great time tonight, Matt. Thank you for working through your throat issues to get this done, and I hope you folks enjoy it. So, enjoy the episode, and I can't say enjoy the episode at the end of the show. What's wrong with me? Hope you enjoyed the episode. We'll see you folks next week for the last entry in Fairy Tale. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.
Jesus, that outro! Holy shit.